We are getting into part 2 of our 7-round Chargers mock draft, and today we are focusing on sleepers and potential impact players to find on day 3.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Drogemeyer, and we've been covering the Chargers together now for 8 seasons, but this is our 6th year as a host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you guys to the everydayers out there who are always making us your first listen, and to make sure that you never miss the show, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcast from. David, what do we got today?
Well, Daniel, we got to get into part 2 of our Chargers mock draft. After day 1 saw us get some very good players, guys that we feel like are going to come in and make an impact for you right away. On day 2 here, we're trying to find guys with great value and some guys that are sleepers, maybe some guys that can overplay their draft slots.
Yeah, it'll be a lot of fun to get into some of these guys we haven't talked about yet, but today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admit it, I have a competitive side, and it is a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly, so join your friends and download Monopoly Go now free on the App Store or Google Play. So just to give everyone a recap, if you missed yesterday's show, go back and watch it, obviously. But we ended up going with Marvin Harrison Jr., if he's there, obviously, in round 1, pick 5, best case scenario for the Chargers. Followed that up with Jackson Powers Johnson, who's been sliding a little bit down draft boards, and then finally got the cornerback we know the Chargers desperately needed with Kamari Lassiter, and found a linebacker that we liked in Cedric Gray in round 4. But the Chargers do have a second 4th round pick that, of course, they got the Keenan Allen pick, right? And this, if we ended up going with a tight end that I really like, Ben Sinnott, the tight end from Kansas State University. I think there's a lot to like there in pairing him with this tight end room they currently have.
Yeah, really like Ben Sinnott here. 6'3", 250 pounds. This guy's a great effort blocker. I think that's one of the first things that you notice. Also, they moved him all over the place. They put him in the fullback position. They put him, in the natural tight end position. They split him out wide, put him in the slot. They put him everywhere. I like how quick he was off the line of scrimmage. I feel like he has some really good yak ability, especially on those tight end screens they utilize quite a bit there at Kansas State. I really was impressive with what he was able to do with the ball in his hands. Also, really strong hands in traffic, had very good concentration, and I just thought he was a very solid route runner. So for a guy who is a pretty well-rounded tight end, I feel like to be able to grab a guy like this in the 4th round would be tremendous value.
And this feels about around the range where he would go, right? And I think Dane Brugler in his latest 7-round mock had him a little ahead of this. Same with the consensus board, but guys fall all the time. I think this would be kind of a best case scenario pick for the Chargers at 110. But talking about the blocking ability, the one play that stood out to me the most was when they were playing against Texas, and he took on a guy who's going to be a 1st-round pick, Byron Murphy, in the hole, and ended up stonewalling him, right? And it's like, okay, and I think he's not strong enough to do that and hold up against the bigger edge rushers, on a down-to-down basis in the NFL. Maybe Ben Herbert can help a little bit with that. But I like what you were talking about as far as the yak ability. We know he's a good athlete. Ended up running a 4.68 40, which now is like the norm for tight ends, which is crazy and very hard to get used to after the tight ends that we grew up with. But 9.73 on the RAS score, and that is being a dude who is shorter as a tight end, didn't get a good score as height-wise, but he did have elite explosiveness scores, elite agility scores, and I think the tape matched that. I think you see a guy, especially, just how quickly he eats up yards. I don't think he makes a lot of guys miss laterally. He's not juking out a lot of guys, but he runs really hard. And I think a lot of people might be surprised to hear that he had a higher yards per catch average than Brock Bowers, right? And he also had 14 missed tackles forced last year, which was 5th in the FBS, and also had the 2nd most yards after contact behind Brock Bowers as well. So I think you like that. I think he plays with the requisite toughness to be in a Greg Roman type of offense. And when you think about, back in the day, even with Joe Hortiz, getting guys like Kyle Juszczyk, getting more kind of versatile guys that can move around the formation, I think he fits with that too. So putting up 49 catches, 676 yards, only having 2 drops on those 73 targets.
Love that.
I think there's a lot to like there. If you're talking about what the cons are, I do think he has to hit at a better level. Like, the tenacity is there as a blocker, but he's not a true people mover. I think there was too many whiffs on his tape. And, some penalties as well from Dane Brugler, 3 holding calls, 2 false starts. There's a lot to like there. I don't have many drawbacks. That would be a couple of them.
Yeah, that's the holding penalties or the false starts, the flag issues is one of the ones I had here. Also, short arms, I guess, according to Dane Brugler by NFL standards, which I honestly I didn't expect that. I mean, looking at him on tape, it didn't seem that way, but
right. And I think as Brugler said, like something that probably didn't affect him as much at the collegiate level, but something that might catch up to him a little bit more at the NFL level.
Yeah, for sure. And then also, you obviously always have to pay attention to the medicals. He did have off-season shoulder surgery in 2023, so just a couple of things you have to keep in mind. But all in all, I think he's a really solid pick here in the 4th round.
And I think the thing that makes you feel a little bit better about the injury issue is just the fact that he's been so durable. I mean, started all 27 games over the last 2 seasons, playing a very physical brand of football.
Yes,
that could lead to injuries, right? And he still held up in a different kind of level in the Big 12, right? But still, you like to see that he held up and it's not somebody with a checkered injury history outside of the shoulder that he just got surgery on during the offseason. But we got a tight end. Now we move to round 5, pick 140. And then we ended up going with a guy that you liked a lot, David, a guy you brought up to me, and someone that could potentially fill a hole for the Chargers in the defensive line room.
Yes, sir. That is going to be Leonard Taylor III from the U, Miami. So, yeah, here with the first things I noticed from him, obviously 6'3", 303 pounds, has that good size on the interior of the defensive line. I feel like he had a very quick and explosive first step. I think that was one of the things I noticed very quickly. Plays with great effort and attitude. He has a very good motor. He has long arms that really allow him to kind of fight off of double teams. And then he has like spurts where he's incredibly disruptive. I felt like he was a streaky type of player. Very strong hands to be able to snatch offensive linemen and move them out of the way.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you like is that, you saw him put a lot of people on the ground. The only thing one of the cons is going to be I saw him on the ground way more than he put other people on the ground.
Yeah.
But I think what you're looking for is, consistency. You're trying to find how somebody like this can make those flashes turn into something a little bit more substantial, a little bit more on an every down basis, or, at least in a rotational defensive line room, or a rotational defensive line role where you can come in and give me a strong 20 to 25 snaps a game eventually and be that kind of player, but give it your all for all those. Like, I do think he had a good motor. I don't think that was necessarily a problem. And I like that Dane Brugler had to say about him that he has a frame that could be worked with. Basically saying, like, this is a guy that's doesn't have a maxed out frame yet. Like, this is a moldable ball of clay for someone like a Ben Herbert to work with because he was on the ground a lot. He did get snatched and ripped away a lot. I think part of the problem is Miami just had him slanting so much. They had all their defensive linemen just slanting. So he's basically getting kind of blindsided, and just moved out of the way because he was already kind of moving laterally right after the snap. But I do think he has a really good first step, which is something good to work with. He is explosive. The wins that he does get are quick wins, which lead to production in the backfield. Did have some missed tackles, but the backfield production, I think you're hoping that he can get back to what he did in 2021, 2022. 20 tackles for loss, an average of 10 per season over those 2 years. You would absolutely take that. That's big time numbers. And, less than that in 2023. But I think if you're looking at the cons, like I said, poor gap integrity. Miami had him slanting a ton, but got himself washed out of a lot of plays. I think finding the ball a little bit too, a couple of times where it just felt like he was a little bit lost on the defensive line, kind of going the wrong direction potentially. Yeah. And I think the one thing about just getting snatched up and ripped to the ground just has to play with a much better pad level, which is something you talk about really with a ton of collegiate defensive linemen in general.
Yeah, the biggest thing for me was the inconsistent pad level. It was very obvious when you watch the tape. It's just when he gets down and he's really using his leverage, that's when he's really having a lot of success. But that just didn't happen on an every down in and down out basis. Also, you allowed blockers to kind of get underneath him, which is one of the things that you said. And he needs to add to his pass rush arsenal and mostly the counters. I think that's really, when he, goes at somebody and it doesn't work, he's kind of done. He doesn't really have anything else to add to that. That has to be added to at the next level. And hopefully, he gets back to, some of the numbers he had in 2022 where he had 10.5 tackles for loss and 3 sacks, because in 23 he only had 3.5 tackles for loss and only 1 sack. So the lack of pass rush production, obviously something that you don't particularly like with your defensive lineman, but there's enough there to feel like he can get back to that level.
Yeah, you hope so. He's a guy that you think has some traits at least, and I think when you're going on day 3, when you're talking about some later picks, you're looking for traits more than anything else. But we still have more picks to get into as we finish up this full 7-round Chargers mock draft, including somebody at safety at a position that we really need to see the Chargers add depth to, and finding a day 3 sleeper running back that can be a home run threat that'll fit nicely in the Chargers backfield, and more on today's Locked On Chargers podcast. First, though, I need to tell you guys about eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with the eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home some huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit. Only available to U.S. customers. All right, David, well, now it's time to get to round 6, pick 181 for the Chargers as we wrap up this full 7-round Chargers mock draft. Before you know it, the final predictions on what the Chargers are going to do in round 1, which is going to be tomorrow's show. And there's a lot of different directions this first round of this draft could go. I'm excited to get into it and nervous about how it's all going to go down. But
yes,
for pick 181, obviously one of the bigger needs for the Chargers is at safety. They have 2 established starters. We felt okay kind of waiting a little later on this, and that's just kind of how the board felt. Kind of like with defensive tackle, where it's like, I wish we could have found a more impactful, more ready-to-go guy. It's just not how the draft felt and not how we kind of put this one together, right? But you're not going to be able to fill every need, and we'll talk about that more later. But we ended up going with the safety from Ohio State, Josh Proctor, with pick 181. What did you like about him?
Yeah, good open field tackler was one of the first things here. Also has good size, 6'1", 199 pounds here for a safety. I think I like that a little bit bigger there. Showed good technique and good finishing ability and run support. Brings some physicality there, and he definitely does not shy away from it. Really long wingspan, which allowed him to kind of break up on passes, and he has very good timing too. He only had 1 career pass interference penalty, according to Dane Brugler, which is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, I love that.
And he's got versatility. He can work deep, and he can also work in the box. And this is very important for a guy who's going to be picked in the later rounds. Extensive special teams contributor in college. If you want to make a team in the NFL, you have to be able to play special teams if you're on that back end of the roster as a defensive back. It's just something that you have to be able to produce, and he has experience doing that.
Yeah, and I think Dan Brewer's at over 400 special teams career snaps, right? So that's nice to see. Poised with the ball in there, like you talked about. Had his best season as far as ball production in his last season. 9 pass breakups and an interception last year. Is nice to see. I thought he had good field vision, right? I thought he saw the field well. I thought he saw what was happening in front of him. And then when he did see a run and things like that, or did see the pass coming, he would break quickly, get downhill quickly, and trigger on that and, go try and make a tackle. I saw, Notre Dame, definitely several missed tackles in that game.
Yeah.
Had a hard time bringing down a dude who's very hard to bring down, Audric Estime. So, I think for him, the biggest thing is just has to rein it in a little bit. He gets downhill so quickly that he has to work and get better angles, right? I wish I could have seen more snaps of him playing in the box. I think it has to do with the games that you watched, right? But mostly when I saw him, he was playing pretty deep. So it's nice to see that he can do that, and cover some ground there. I think he's a good enough athlete to do that, especially in split safety looks, 6.58 RAS, above average athlete with poor explosiveness grades. And I think the big thing here is just the medicals have to check out. Had a broken leg, gonna have to get that right. And then I think, like we've talked about before, better to rein someone in, right, than have to kind of bring that aggression out. This is a dude who's a big hitter, can make kind of game-changing plays, force fumbles, and things like that with his big hits. So I think there's a lot of excitement there and some reasons to be concerned, as you're going to find with any 6th-round pick.
Yeah, I mean, the durability concerns, like you mentioned, is definitely something that's at the forefront of the cons here. He's missed time every single season.
Yeah.
Also, he's kind of inconsistent in man coverage, and he's an older prospect. This is another, 6th-year senior here who's going to be 25 years old by draft weekend. So, this is an older guy. I mean, these are some of the concerns that you're just going to have to deal with when you're trying to take guys a little bit later on in the draft.
Yeah, an inspiring story, dude who, probably thought he wasn't going to play football anymore and made his way all the way back and is considered for a draft prospect. So I think, good story, an exciting player, right, with some flaws, obviously. But not as excited I am as about the next pick. We ended up, maybe he would be a 6th-round pick because he's been shooting up draft boards very quickly. Round 7, pick 225 when we made this. seemed more realistic, you might have to take him in the 6th now. But we went with Blake Watson, the running back from Memphis. This is something we talked about a lot as we were putting this together, is where do you take a running back? And kind of the consensus that we had is, hey, we could potentially take a later running back, and he doesn't have to necessarily be the, bell cow back. You don't need him to be the running back of the future per se, but you can get someone that brings some juice to this running back room, which is exactly what he would do. I mean, if you look at what he's able to do with Memphis after playing at Old Dominion, transfers to a bigger conference, going up against bigger competition, and has the best season that he's had. I mean, over the last few years, averaged 6 yards per carry, 5.9 yards per carry over the last 2 years. And I think when you're talking about giving Gus Edwards, right, pairing Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins, who is coming off an Achilles injury and might have had some of that juice, sapped a little bit. We don't know yet. This is a home run hitter to me you could add into that and feel good about.
Yeah, a little bit on the smaller side. He's 5'9", but he has some decent weight. He's 195 pounds there. Good receiver. He's one of 2 backs in the country last year that had over 50-plus catches, which is, a big thing. And I think that fits right in with the kind of profile that you're looking for with the 2 running backs that you have on your roster. Or, obviously with Isaiah Spiller as well. But none of those guys are really great pass catchers. Blake Watson absolutely is a great pass catcher. I think he's more quicker than fast, has very good vision and patience. He really allows his blocks to kind of set up before he kind of cuts through and takes off. I definitely saw that he displayed some big playability. I mean, not necessarily was able to take it all the way to the house, but he was able to rip off some major big runs. Has some very good stop and start ability, has some good wiggle, and has some very good contact balance. He's not a guy that's particularly easy to take down to the ground.
Yeah, Dane Brugler put it well. I think he said he's not powerful, but he's competitive. And I think for his size, he does run really tough. You talked about the receiving threat. 53 catches from a college running back is not something you see often. And a dude who used to play receiver, and you see that. I mean, I saw him take plenty, 30, 40-yard plays to the house as well. So I think he is a legit home run hitter. I know some people question that top-end speed. To me, I thought it was fine. I saw him pull away from many people on some of those big runs throughout his collegiate career, watching the last few years. Another guy that could have been here too, Cody Schrader, a guy that Trevor Sikkema brought up. So I feel like you can kind of approach it one of 2 ways. You can go with someone you feel like complements the guys you currently have, or you can get someone that you want and think is, that physical dude that fits into what Greg Roman wants to do. This is a change of pace back. This is a guy that does something well that your top 2 running backs, as we see it, J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards, don't do very well. And I think he'd fit in nicely because I think you can use him as a runner as well. The cons here, you have to be a good pass protector if you want to be kind of that designated third down back. I think there's some inconsistencies there and just a smaller guy. I mean, 200 pounds, 195. I think you want your running backs being closer to 215, 220, right? So 5'9", 200 pounds, a little bit smaller. I think the other thing is just over 700 touches in his career. Definitely some wear and tear on the tires, but not something that I would be over concerned about because that's the thing. You don't need him to be the bell cow. And I think that's the nice thing about the Chargers running back room is they have guys in there that'll fill in some of his weaknesses.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, also, I think just a smaller school level of competition, at least that where he competed at, maybe a little bit questionable there. And like we mentioned, a smaller back, there's not really much room to add to the frame there. I mean, he kind of is what he is going to be at the next level. And then, like we mentioned, and Dane Brugler mentioned, maybe the breakaway speed may be a little bit of a concern. But like we said, I mean, we saw
the Chargers don't have anyone running a 4.40 in their running back room. So
that's true.
I'd say that, comparatively, I think he is. I mean, each their own, that's what I said. I've seen people question it. I mean, what's a home run? Do you have to be a 4.3 guy to be a home run hitter? I don't know. But I think you can make plenty of big-time plays.
Yeah, good compliment, though. I feel like he's a good compliment to the running backs in the room.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, that's what we ended up doing with this, right? We weren't trying to find the running back of the future. We waited on running back. We prioritized some other positions because they have Gus Edwards for the next 2 seasons because they brought in J.K. Dobbins. We'll see how they feel about Isaiah Spiller. I'd rather do something late like this than take Blake Corum in the 2nd round. There's going to be good running backs next year, too. Maybe it's even a better class. So I just don't think they have to come out of this draft class. I think they'd be fine with the guys they have and a late-round pick potentially to either season or to complement the guys that they currently have right now. So I love this pick later on. I think a true sleeper in the sense that he could absolutely outplay his draft position very easily if he gets in the right situation. So does he fit with the Chargers offense? Do they see him as a fit? we'll see, but you have to like the talent because the dude made a ton of big plays in Memphis and at Old Dominion as well. But we still have one more pick, David, and we decided to double dip at a position of need, especially late, take a chance on a guy, add some depth later on in the draft. So we're going to talk about that and how we feel about our class as a whole and more on today's Locked On Chargers podcast. First, though, I need to tell you guys that we've all been there, either as a player or a fan. It's halftime and the scoreboard is not looking good. You're feeling low and you're not sure if your team can pull out the win, but that's when you dig deep, you lift your head up, and you say to yourself, time to get back in the game. Pull off some bank heists, and take as much of my friend's money as I possibly can. That's right, the smash hit mobile game Monopoly Go lets you compete with your friends to get the most riches and the biggest empire. That's the Monopoly you love, but on your phone anytime with tons of new twists, including leaderboards to compare your progress to your buddies, and there's so much to do. You can play on countless dynamic Monopoly boards, make your friends bankrupt by smashing their landmarks with a wrecking ball, charge other players rent for your iconic properties. That's the part that I really love. You can even work with your friends to crack open community chests and in tournaments to get extra rewards and climb up the leaderboard. So get back out there, put your game face on, and download the Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. All right, David, we still have one more pick here, and there were a couple of positions we wanted to double dip at because of how thin they are currently. And I think both of them were wide receiver and cornerback, because either one of those spots, you have a real situation where next year and even this year, you are still incredibly thin. So we ended up going with a wide receiver, but I do want to tell everyone to make sure they're checking out the Locked On NFL Draft Show, where you can get the full 6-round Locked On Chargers mock draft or Locked On NFL mock draft, where you can get the Locked On Chargers pick Marvin Harrison Jr. and see how not only the draft experts, but also the local experts react to that and how it affects their team as well. So make sure you guys check out Locked On NFL Draft to go check that out, because it was a lot of fun. And I think, we did pretty good there. So with the 7th round pick, 253, only a couple picks away from Mr. Irrelevant, which, maybe isn't such a bad thing after Brock Purdy now, right? We ended up going with Xavier Weaver, the wide receiver from Colorado. We double dipped at receiver. We need to see the Chargers add some depth to that room with the question marks they have there, and even Josh Palmer going into the last year under his contract. Shout out to Daniel Stebbins, who slid me a DM and said, hey, check this guy out. He's a lot of fun. I liked what I saw a lot, David. A pretty good athlete overall, a good route runner. I think you could do a lot worse than that at the end of the draft, and finding someone like an Xavier Weaver who you can snatch up before, teams are lining up to get him an undrafted free agency.
Yeah, good hands. I felt like he showed some good effort as a blocker. I feel like the routes were pretty good, and then he was open quite a lot. Just in the couple of games that we watched, he was hey, I'm here, throw me the football. Had some yak ability, used a variety of releases off the line of scrimmage to kind of gain some separation. Did a good job of tracking the ball over his shoulder. He caught a 50-plus yard bomb over his shoulder with the corner in tight coverage, which is one of those things that you really like to see if you're wanting a guy that's going to go get you some really good deep yards. So, all in all, this is a guy with a 7th round pick. Had some very, very good production at Colorado, probably some of the best that he had. 68 receptions, 908 yards, and 4 touchdowns. So this is a guy who, in the 7th round, I feel like he brings quite a bit to the table.
Yeah, and you think in a room right now that currently only has Josh Palmer, Darius Davis, right, and then Quentin Johnston, you need to add multiple guys to that room. Maybe it's a free agent, right? And if we didn't go with him, you'd probably add maybe a DJ Chark. Does make more sense at that point, right?
Yeah.
But we wanted to add a couple of guys to that room and didn't end up getting to go with corner, which we wanted to. Dwight McGlothern was another guy we liked there. A guy that just athletically, we didn't think they would take 2 kind of less than super athletes at corner, and we already went with Kamari Lassiter there. But this is the thing with Xavier Weaver. Like, his release package means a lot to me because this is a slight dude, right?
Yeah.
So, like, if guys get their hands on him, it's going to be tough for him to get to where he wants to get on time. But he showed different ways of beating press coverage. A little different than someone like Darius Davis, who's a lot slighter, because this dude was legit playing on the outside a lot and had to face a lot of press man. But also gives you that inside-out versatility. He's absolutely a dude who could play in the slot and isn't a burner with the 4.49 speed. But I think to what you were talking about, does a really good job using his release to stack the defensive back. And what that means is even if he's not super fast, he's getting behind them and using his body to stay in front of them to be able to be a deep threat. So I really like the way, there's a few times where you just see him getting corners to open up their hips, and then he just snaps off a route back to the quarterback and the comeback route, things like that. And he could also serve as a backup punt returner if, anything were to happen to Darius Davis. Averaged 16.5 yards per punt return in 2023, according to Dane Brugler. And I think when you see, a torn labrum that he had, and he still put up 68 catches, 908 yards, and 4 touchdowns with a new team, I think you like to see that. So I think he is a legitimate sleeper that later on in the draft could very much outplay where he was taken in the draft. And that's the thing, is he's listed as 6 foot, 175 pounds. If Ben Herbert can bulk this dude up, he has the tenacity to be an impact blocker. I like the way he tries to block, and we know blocking is super important from the wide receivers and the wide receivers that Greg Roman likes, right? He has the tenacity to do it. He's just not strong enough. So I think he has the frame at 6 foot to potentially gain some mass there, right? And he could struggle with physical corners that get their hands on him, but I like the release package. And another guy going to be 24 as a rookie. So I think you could add some depth there. A guy I like if they could find him that late. I think it's a steal. Let's talk about the draft as a whole, right? Because we now know what we have, 7 rounds. We didn't do any trade backs, and I'm sure there probably will be a trade back, but we wanted to stick with what they have and what they could do with it. And I think what you see is you can't fill everything, right? Even if you did trade down, we see the benefits of trading down, because even as you're going through this, you're like, man, I'm not going to get to all the Chargers' needs, right? But I really like what we were able to do and where we attacked with the guys that we did get.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty even draft. I mean, 5 offensive players, 4 defensive players. I think that, we got guys that at impact positions, guys that we absolutely had, like the non-negotiable positions like receiver, center, corner. We also got, some guys at linebacker. And then, we addressed some depth needs on the defensive side. Like I said, linebacker, defensive line, safety. I think those are all positions that we felt like we had to address in the draft, and feel like we did a very good job of being able to kind of get a really good, well-rounded book of business here.
Yeah, and I think, we made a point to improve an offense that lost a ton of firepower, right?
Yeah.
We got a difference maker with versatility on the offensive line that I think just makes your whole offensive line better because of the versatility that he brings, and I'll get more into that. But you also found a guy that you think can be wide receiver 1 right away, and found somebody who could round out the depth in that room and play inside and outside and give you some versatility there, right? And I think that you got an offensive weapon as a tight end, right? You gave your offense some more firepower, which I think is important. You used a premier pick on a cornerback. You got a dude that you feel like can start from day one potentially in the slot or make an impact for your team in year 1 with Kamari Lassiter. I think the big thing here, David, was just edge rusher and offensive tackle. And this is the thing, is you can't get everyone. You're going to have to leave some needs unaddressed and then try to fill it in the second wave of free agency. I think the big thing with these two things is a couple things. Edge rusher, late we weren't going to necessarily find the edge rusher of the future in the 5th round or later. It's just we didn't see that guy. If there was that guy, we would have picked that guy, right?
Yeah.
But you do still have Joey Bosa and Tulu Tuipulotu under contract in 2025. I think now you want to add a rusher in free agency to give Chris Rumpf competition. And then the other thing is offensive tackle, right? Offensive tackle, I think there's a big drop-off, even though everyone raves about this offensive tackle class, because the guys I was watching later on weren't guys I felt like were going to be huge players. And there was other needs that the Chargers had. But what Jackson Powers-Johnson gives you is potentially a guy that could, be guard or push Bradley Bozeman to right guard, and then maybe you have Jamari Sawyer and Trey Pipkins battling it out for right tackle. And I think Trey Pipkins has been a scapegoat anyways, but you have some competition there. So edge rusher and offensive tackle, we couldn't fill it, but I think there's still reasons, that I don't think it's going to tank this team.
Yeah, I mean, you have guys that hopefully are going to be on the roster that, and hopefully Joey Bosa can stay healthy, because we all know what he can do when he is on the field. And then for offensive line, I just feel like there's a couple things. One, you hope you get some production from the coaching staff and get some development there.
Everyone's going to get the bump except for Trey Pipkins, right? According to a lot of people, or Jeff we have.
Right. And hopefully the scheme and the more rushing, more run heavy, because, hey, offensive linemen love to run block. So hopefully that's going to help them out. And just having a more balanced offense is going to allow them to pass protect better, because the defense can't just sit in on you throwing the football. So I think there's a lot of reasons to expect and hope that the offensive line is going to be able to provide better production at the end of the day.
And, at the end of the day also, David, everyone's going to have their own opinions. Everyone's going to have draft guys that they like. There's a huge portion of guys that we didn't get to watch. I just had a kid 2 weeks ago. So if you do have guys you like, put it in the comments. We hope the Chargers potentially get one of those guys that's really good that we didn't get to watch. But everyone's going to have their difference of opinions. We appreciate you guys checking out the show as always and everything we did during this draft season, because it's a lot for us. We have day jobs as well. Yeah. And we're putting in, 100+ hours of film work in on the draft pretty much every single season. So if you have other guys you like, if you don't like our draft, I get it. if you love our draft, we appreciate you, right? I mean, it's just everyone's going to have their own opinion this time of the year. And nobody's right or wrong because we don't know what these guys are going to do. So we found guys that made sense to us, and I really like the way this draft turned out. The Chargers draft ended up like this. I'd be pretty content. The one thing, David, we didn't do, not one Michigan Wolverine on this team in this draft class. So that's something, you know, that could definitely change. A lot of those really good guys that needs are probably going to all go in the second round. So Blake Corum maybe a little bit after.
Undrafted free agency, Daniel.
Yeah, Junior Colson, Chris Jenkins. You're only going to get so many of those guys because they're probably all going in the same round. So it'll be interesting. I do think they probably end up with one Michigan player if I had to put my eyes on it, or had to put money on it. But we ended up with 2 Buckeyes and no Michigan Wolverines in this draft. But make sure you guys are back here tomorrow because we're getting into our final predictions and how everything can kind of be a little chaotic potentially on night 1 of the NFL draft. I don't even know what we're going to say right now as we're recording this because a lot could happen. There's a lot to predict in round 1 for the Chargers. It could go a lot of different ways, but make sure you guys don't miss it. Go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcast from. You can also find the show every day on all of our social media. You can find us on Twitter at Locked On LAC, Instagram at Locked On Chargers, and our Locked On Chargers Facebook page. You can also find me on Twitter at Dan Talk Sports and David Drogemeyer at Dro Talk SD. But we've had a lot of fun this draft season. It's been very tiring, but we appreciate you guys always checking in on the content. And make sure you guys are back here tomorrow for the final predictions on what happens in this first round. But until then, guys, take it easy and go Bolts.